Today, we're investigating ancient technologies that still leave researchers with uncomfortable questions. And I don't mean objects that are simply old, unusual, or difficult to understand. I mean machines, weapons, materials, and structures created thousands of years ago that display a level of precision, scientific knowledge, or engineering skill that seems far ahead of its time. In some cases, we understand what these creations did, but not how their builders manufactured them so effectively. In others, we have theories, but the original recipe, technique, or purpose disappeared centuries ago. From a mechanical computer recovered from the bottom of the sea to a weapon that supposedly burned across the surface of water, these discoveries remind us that technological knowledge does not always move forward. Sometimes, it disappears, and we may never get it back. Let's begin with an object that forced historians to reconsider what ancient engineers were capable of building. Number 1. The Antikythera mechanism. It's the year 1901. A group of Greek sponge divers is exploring the remains of an ancient shipwreck near the island of Antikythera. The ship had gone down sometime during the 1st century BC, leaving its cargo scattered across the seabed. The divers recovered statues, pottery, jewelry, coins, and several heavily corroded pieces of bronze. One of those bronze fragments did not look particularly important. It was little more than an irregular greenish lump, damaged by centuries beneath the ocean. It was taken to a museum and stored with the other recovered artifacts. Then the fragment cracked open. Inside were tiny bronze gears, not one or two crude wheels. Dozens of precisely arranged, interlocking gears packed into the remains of a wooden case. Researchers eventually realized that this strange object was not simply a clock or decorative instrument. It was a mechanical calculator designed to model the movement of the heavens. Known today as the Antikythera mechanism, the device could track the cycles of the sun and moon, predict eclipses, display calendar information, and possibly model the movements of the 5 planets known to Greek astronomers. It also appears to have included a dial connected to the timing of athletic competitions such as the ancient Olympic Games. To operate it, a user likely turned a hand crank. As the crank moved, the internal gears rotated at different speeds, reproducing astronomical cycles that could span years or even decades. Think about what that means. More than 2,000 years ago, someone managed to transform complicated astronomical mathematics into a portable mechanical machine. It was essentially an ancient analog computer. To put that in perspective, historians have not found another surviving geared device approaching this level of complexity for many centuries afterward. Finding it in a Roman-era shipwreck would be like opening a medieval chest and discovering a functioning mechanical calculator inside. Modern imaging has allowed researchers to examine the surviving fragments and reconstruct much of the mechanism's design. But major questions remain. Who built it? Was it created by a famous workshop, or by an inventor whose name has been completely lost? How common were devices like this? The mechanism was being transported aboard a ship, which suggests it had an intended destination and possibly an owner. It may not have been the only one ever made. It may simply be the only one that survived. And if an object this sophisticated was recovered by accident from a single shipwreck, how many similar machines are still waiting beneath the Mediterranean? Number 2. Greek fire. It's the 7th century AD, and Constantinople is under threat. The capital of the Byzantine Empire sits at the center of enormously valuable trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. Capturing it would mean controlling one of the most strategically important cities in the known world. Enemy fleets approach the city expecting a conventional naval battle. Instead, Byzantine ships reveal a weapon unlike anything their opponents have encountered. From metal tubes mounted on the ships, crews project streams of burning liquid. The substance strikes wooden vessels and appears to continue burning even as it spreads across the water. Panic moves through the attacking fleet. Sailors trying to escape the flames by jumping overboard may find the burning substance floating around them. Ships are consumed. Formations collapse. The Byzantine defenders survive. The weapon became known to later historians as Greek fire. For centuries, it was one of the Byzantine Empire's most feared military advantages. Accounts describe it being projected from tubes, thrown in containers, or used in smaller handheld devices. Its psychological effect may have been almost as powerful as the physical damage it caused. An enemy who believed the Byzantines possessed Greek fire might hesitate before approaching at all. But the exact formula was a closely guarded secret. The recipe may have been divided among different specialists so that no single person understood the entire production process. The substance itself was likely only one part of the technology. The Byzantines also needed pumps, nozzles, storage containers, ignition systems, and crews trained to operate the weapon without setting their own ships on fire. The ingredients remain debated. Possible components include petroleum-based liquids, tree resin, sulfur, and other materials capable of creating a sticky and difficult-to-extinguish fire. Some popular descriptions claim that Greek fire ignited automatically when it touched water. That detail is less certain. Historical accounts were written by observers who may not have understood the weapon and who sometimes described it in dramatic or symbolic language. What seems clear is that it burned effectively in naval conditions and was extremely difficult for enemies to extinguish. Imagine facing an ancient flamethrower while standing on a wooden ship covered in rope, cloth, oil, and pitch. There would be almost nowhere to run. Over time, knowledge of the original formula and delivery system disappeared. When Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the complete technological tradition behind Greek fire appears to have already faded. Modern experiments can create substances with some of its reported properties. But without an original sample or surviving formula, we cannot know whether any reconstruction truly matches the Byzantine weapon. The mystery may not be one impossible chemical. It may have been a carefully engineered system combining fuel, pressure, ignition, and military training. And once that system vanished, one of history's most feared weapons vanished with it. Number 3. Damascus steel. During the Middle Ages, swords produced and traded throughout the Middle East developed an almost legendary reputation. European travelers described blades that were exceptionally sharp, flexible, and resistant to breaking. Their surfaces contained flowing patterns that looked like ripples, ladders, or waves moving through the metal. These were the blades commonly associated with Damascus steel. The name is somewhat misleading. Many of the blades may have been forged in different locations using crucible steel imported from India or Central Asia. The metal was often connected to a material known as wootz steel. High-carbon steel was produced in sealed containers and then transported to skilled swordsmiths, who carefully forged it into weapons. The distinctive pattern was not simply painted or carved onto the surface. It emerged from the internal structure of the steel. That structure depended on the composition of the original ore, the amount of carbon, trace elements within the metal, and the temperatures used during forging. A swordsmith had to heat the steel enough to shape it without destroying the microscopic structures that produced its most valuable properties. Too hot, and the pattern could disappear. Too cold, and the metal could crack. The process required extraordinary control. Stories later claimed that Damascus blades could cut through other swords or slice a silk scarf drifting through the air. Those accounts are difficult to verify and were probably exaggerated over generations. But surviving blades show that their makers had mastered an unusually sophisticated form of metallurgy. In the early 2000s, researchers studying samples from historical blades reported microscopic structures that included extremely fine carbon-rich formations. Some studies described tube-like structures resembling carbon nanotubes. That interpretation remains debated, and it does not mean medieval swordsmiths understood modern nanotechnology. But it does show that their forging process could produce complex structures at an incredibly small scale. The swordsmiths did not need electron microscopes to understand that their methods worked. They relied on experience passed from master to apprentice. The color of the metal, the behavior of the blade, the sound of the hammer, and the appearance of the surface all provided information. Then the tradition declined. The source of the original steel may have changed. Trade routes shifted. Certain ores may have become unavailable. Workshops closed, and techniques that had been protected as professional secrets were no longer passed down. Modern smiths can create patterned steels that look similar, and researchers have reproduced several features associated with historical Damascus blades. But reproducing every characteristic of every surviving blade is difficult because there was never one single universal recipe. Each sword carries evidence of its material, workshop, and individual maker. Damascus steel was not magic. It was something more fragile. It was generations of accumulated knowledge. And once the chain connecting those generations was broken, much of that knowledge disappeared. Number 4. Roman concrete. The Pantheon still stands in the center of Rome nearly 2,000 years after its construction. Its enormous dome remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. It has survived earthquakes, storms, wars, fires, neglect, political collapse, and almost 20 centuries of changing weather. Meanwhile, many modern concrete structures require major repairs after only a few decades. So what did Roman builders know that we do not? Roman concrete was not identical to the Portland cement used in most construction today. Roman builders combined lime, water, volcanic ash, and pieces of stone or broken brick. The volcanic material, especially ash from certain regions around the Bay of Naples, reacted with the lime and water to form durable mineral bonds. For marine structures, seawater could trigger additional chemical reactions that strengthen the material over time. That is the opposite of what often happens to modern reinforced concrete. Salt water can penetrate modern concrete and corrode the steel reinforcement inside it. As that steel rusts and expands, the surrounding concrete begins to crack. Roman marine concrete did not depend on internal steel bars, so it aged differently. Researchers have also studied small white pieces of lime found inside ancient Roman concrete. For years, these fragments were sometimes treated as evidence of poor mixing. More recent research suggests that at least some Roman builders may have deliberately used a hot mixing process that left highly reactive lime fragments inside the material. When cracks formed and water entered, the lime could react, dissolve, and create new mineral deposits. Those deposits could fill portions of the cracks. In other words, some Roman concrete may have possessed a limited ability to heal itself. Not because the Romans had created a living material, but because they had designed a mixture that continued reacting when exposed to water. The Pantheon is still more complicated than a single secret ingredient. Its builders reduced the weight of the dome as it rose. Heavy materials were used near the base, while lighter volcanic stone was used near the top. The thickness of the dome also decreases toward the central opening. The structure survived because its architects understood geometry, weight distribution, materials, and construction sequencing. They did not accidentally pour a giant dome and hope for the best. Modern scientists can reproduce many aspects of Roman concrete, and companies are exploring commercial materials inspired by it. The challenge is creating something that is durable, economical, environmentally practical, and compatible with modern construction standards. The Romans did not necessarily make concrete that was superior for every possible use, but they did create structures designed to work with their materials for centuries. And the Pantheon continues to stand as evidence that ancient builders were not simply constructing for the next generation. They were building for the next civilization. Number 5. The Nazca Lines. Sometime between approximately 500 BC and 500 AD, people living in the deserts of southern Peru began creating enormous designs across the landscape. They formed straight lines stretching into the distance. They created trapezoids, spirals, geometric patterns, and images of animals and plants. A monkey, a spider, a hummingbird, a condor. Some designs extend for hundreds of feet. Others form pathways and lines that continue for miles. Today, they are known as the Nazca Lines. The figures were created by removing the dark reddish stones covering the desert surface. This exposed the lighter soil beneath them, producing lines that stood out against the surrounding ground. The technique itself was simple. The scale was not. From ground level, a person standing inside one of the larger figures may see only a shallow path through the stones. From higher ground or from the air, the separate lines come together into recognizable images. This has inspired decades of speculation. How could people without aircraft design figures that are easier to appreciate from above? The most practical explanation does not require lost flying machines or extraterrestrial visitors. A small drawing can be enlarged using grids, stakes, ropes, and careful measurements. Modern experiments have demonstrated that a small team can create large, accurate figures using tools available to the Nazca people. And the designers may have viewed portions of their work from nearby hills. But demonstrating that something was possible is not the same as understanding exactly why it was done. The Nazca created hundreds of geometric designs, long lines, and animal figures across a vast region. Some may have been ceremonial pathways. Others may have been connected to water, fertility, astronomy, pilgrimage, or the worship of sacred landscapes. Different lines may have served different purposes. Their preservation is also remarkable. The region is among the driest places on Earth. Limited rainfall and relatively stable conditions allowed shallow markings in the ground to survive for centuries. New figures continue to be identified through field surveys, drones, satellite imagery, and image analysis. Some were never completely lost. Local people knew they were there. But modern technology has allowed researchers to recognize patterns that are difficult to see from the ground. The greatest mystery of the Nazca lines is not how human beings moved a layer of stones. It is why generations of people invested so much labor in transforming an enormous desert into a sacred landscape. They were clearly communicating something. The problem is that we no longer understand the language. And now it is time for the supporting cast. These mysteries are shorter, but they are no less strange. In the 1930s, archaeologists working near Baghdad examined several ancient clay containers containing copper cylinders and iron rods. The objects became known as the Baghdad batteries. When modern replicas are filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar, they can generate a small electrical current. That has led to claims that people in ancient Mesopotamia possessed batteries more than 1,000 years before modern electrical science. Some have suggested the devices were used for electroplating metal, religious demonstrations, or medical treatments. But no ancient wires, instructions, or electrical equipment have been found with them. Other researchers argue that the objects were ordinary containers used to hold scrolls or ritual materials, and that their electrical potential is coincidental. The components can produce electricity. The mystery is whether their creators ever intended them to. The Lycurgus cup is a Roman glass vessel created around the 4th century AD. In ordinary reflected light, the glass appears green. When light shines through it, the cup changes to a deep red. For centuries, the effect seemed almost impossible to explain. Modern analysis revealed tiny particles of gold and silver suspended inside the glass. These particles interact with light differently depending on how the cup is illuminated. The result is an ancient example of what scientists call dichroic glass. Roman craftspeople almost certainly did not understand nanoparticles in modern scientific terms. But someone discovered that adding very small quantities of certain metals to glass could produce extraordinary optical effects. Whether the result came from a controlled recipe or a fortunate accident remains uncertain. Either way, the finished cup proves that Roman glassmakers could manipulate materials at a scale they could not physically see. The walls of Sacsayhuaman. Above the city of Cusco in Peru stands the monumental complex of Sacsayhuaman. Its walls contain enormous limestone blocks fitted together without mortar. Some stones have dozens of different angles. Their surfaces interlock so closely that the walls have survived centuries of earthquakes. The Inca did not need laser cutters or unknown machines to accomplish this. They had skilled labor, stone tools, abrasive materials, ropes, ramps, levers, and generations of construction experience. But understanding the general methods does not make the achievement less extraordinary. Some blocks weigh well over 100 tons. They had to be quarried, transported across difficult terrain, shaped, raised, tested, and adjusted. The mystery is not whether human beings could build Sacsayhuaman. They clearly did. The mystery is how much planning, experimentation, and labor organization were required to do it so successfully. Sometime during the early 15th century, an unknown writer or group of writers created a heavily illustrated manuscript in an unidentified script. Today, it is known as the Voynich manuscript. Its pages contain drawings of unfamiliar plants, circular astronomical diagrams, strange containers, and human figures bathing in pools connected by pipes. The writing follows repeated patterns. Certain symbols appear more frequently in particular sections or positions, making the text look more structured than random scribbling. But no confirmed translation exists. It could represent an unknown language, an encrypted text, an invented writing system, or an elaborate work designed to appear meaningful. Professional cryptographers, linguists, historians, computer scientists, and amateur codebreakers have all proposed solutions. None has gained widespread acceptance. Hundreds of years after it was written, we still cannot confidently read a single sentence. High in the Bolivian Andes lies Puma Punku, part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological complex. The site contains carefully shaped stone blocks, including distinctive pieces with repeated grooves, right angles, and recessed surfaces. Photographs often make the stones appear as though they were manufactured by modern machines. In reality, many surfaces are weathered, damaged, or less precise than sensational images suggest. But the craftsmanship is still impressive. Tiwanaku builders worked with sandstone and dense volcanic stone using hammerstones, abrasives, measuring tools, and patient labor. Some blocks were designed to fit together using metal clamps and repeated architectural forms. The site does not require an unknown civilization with advanced machinery. What it reveals is a society with sophisticated planning, standardized designs, and highly trained stoneworkers. The real mystery is how much knowledge vanished when Tiwanaku declined and its building traditions came to an end. So there you have it. 10 ancient technologies and creations that continue to challenge our assumptions about the past. The Antikythera mechanism transformed astronomy into a machine. Greek fire protected an empire before its recipe disappeared. Damascus steel preserved generations of metallurgical knowledge inside a sword. Roman concrete survived because its builders understood how materials could change over time. And the Nazca people transformed an empty desert into a landscape filled with symbols that we still struggle to interpret. None of these discoveries proves that ancient people possessed secret modern technology. They prove something far more interesting. Human beings have always experimented. They observed the sky, tested materials, shaped landscapes, protected knowledge, and solved difficult problems using the tools available to them. But knowledge is fragile. A workshop can close. A trade route can disappear. A city can fall. A language can be forgotten. And a technology that took centuries to perfect can vanish within a single generation. So the next time archaeologists recover a strange lump of bronze from a shipwreck, they may want to examine it carefully. It might not look like much, but neither did the world's oldest surviving mechanical computer. Which ancient mystery should Professor Relic investigate next?